Hello my friends! As you might know, Age of Mythology just came out and it brought with it huge changes to almost every myth unit in the game. So let's take a look at those changes in form of a tier list for every single myth unit this game has to offer. The tiers range from S to D, or from insanely OP to steer clear of those. I'm gonna rate them by how powerful they are, but also how cool they are and how they compare to the original units. As always, you won't have to see my sorry face most of the time because I will put some footage of the units while I talk. Also, I'll be rating them by faction, starting off with the Greek, so let's get into it. First up, we have the Hippocampus, the unit that has gotten no changes to it whatsoever. You still get him for free if you're playing Poseidon, and it respawns at your docks. However, there has been a huge change to all scouting units in this game. May I introduce to you His Majesty, the Auto Scout button. If you press this button, all scouts start scouting all on their own. You don't have to do anything. So just press this button and you'll get free vision of the map after a while. And that's a clear A tier to me, a respawning guy, with Auto Scout. Next up, we have the Pegasus. Now this one isn't exclusive to Poseidon, every single Greek god has it. And man is it a good one. It costs only 50 food and 2 favor, so it's basically the cost of a villager, and you get a flying scout that can't be killed until like age 3, because there are very few ranged units until then. So this one might not be that powerful in single player, cause the map is already full of enemies, but in multiplayer, scouting is hugely important, and it's so powerful. Just buy a bunch of those, please, for God's sake. Just listen to me, buy Pegasus, okay? I know it's counterintuitive to spend like money on stuff that isn't gonna fight, but man, is it gonna help. Trust me. Clear S tier. Next up, Centaurs. These guys now have an area of effect ranged attack, and it's really strong. If you have a bunch of those together, they can wreak so much chaos. I'm not even joking. Centaurs are really strong now, and they are really quick, so they can get out of danger really easily. This is an A tier. Really good A tier. Next up, Cyclops. These guys haven't changed that much. They still throw people around into buildings or other units this time, but they still feel the same. They're one of the stronger tier 2 units in the game. I like Cyclopses, the clubs, man. The clubs are so cool. Other than that, yeah, that's it. A very strong tier 2 unit. A tier. Next up, we have the Minotaur, one of my favorite units in this game. They gave him the ability to knock a bunch of people away. So you have a bunch of those, they can just keep knocking people away and you can be a happy camper. I'm not even joking, they are so strong. I would even dare to say the strongest tier 2 unit in the game. Maybe together with one Norse unit, which I'm gonna talk about later. But yeah, Minotaurs are strong. Go for it. S tier. Next up, the Hydra. I think the Hydra has gotten a huge buff in this game. If you're good at microing, the Hydra can be one of the strongest units in the game. It can regen if you buy an upgrade, and man is it gonna be OP if you grow 5 heads. The damage output of a 5-headed Hydra, it's not even funny. My god. It does more damage than basically any unit in the game. That's how strong it is. Again, I am not even joking. Honestly, this is an S tier, no question about it. Very powerful. Next up, we have the Scylla, the Hydra of the Sea. The Sea-La Hydra. Okay. Bad joke. Anyways, still the same principle applies. It attacks units and gets heads while doing that. It can also regen health, so it's very strong if microed correctly. Other than that, I don't have much to say about it, because it's the same thing as a Hydra. However, it's on the sea, so I'm gonna have to give it an A instead of an S. Next up, the Manticore. Finally someone on the lower tier of the ladder. In the original, okay, here's an anecdote from Amon's live. In the original, I never really liked that Manticores, not even a bit. Then came the Titans expansion, and there's this Mount Olympus level where you can transform a bunch of your guys into Manticores. And my god, do they do damage. Like, they obliterate everything. A group of 20 of these guys can destroy any army, no matter how big or small it is. If there are units in it, they aren't gonna be a lot longer. However, on the same Mount Olympus level in this game, the Manticores felt so much weaker. I even had more of them than the original, and it took them like twice as much to kill units. I think the spread of their attack is bigger, but everything else sucks more. So, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to give it a C tier. Next up, the Nemean Lion. These guys have gotten a huge buff compared to the original. They're roar stun now, and if you have a group of enemy units, you can stun lock them. That's how powerful they are if you have a couple of them. Like, I'm not even joking, you can destroy whole groups of enemies without even blinking. That's how powerful Nemean Lions are now. So that's why I'm gonna have to give it S tier. And we're back to the bottom of the table with Mr. Carcinos. In the description it says this guy is good against ships. However, this guy can barely destroy one ship. And this is, mind you, a tier 4 unit. So it has literally no reason for it to be that bad. However, it is. And I'm not even gonna talk about it anymore, because I'm so disappointed that it sucks so much. D tier. And now we have the Chimera. It now has the ability to make a puddle of fire, which is underwhelming. However, the Chimera in the original game was also very underwhelming. I never go for it, and I don't even like it. And for that reason, I don't even have to talk about it any longer. I'm just gonna give it a D tier and get this over with. Now we have the Colossus. I would say the most iconic Greek unit in the game. These guys are insanely strong, have a bunch of health, can be upgraded multiple times, and can eat wood and gold mines to replenish health. It's literally the perfect unit. Throw a couple of these guys as the front line, and you will not lose, even if you tried. S tier. Next up, the biggest disappointment for me in the entire game. The Medusa. For some reason, the developers removed basically all insta-kill abilities in this game. Medusa's one was the most iconic one. It can turn people and units into stone. Now, she still has that ability and it does a bunch of damage to infantry units, but it doesn't one-shot most myth units anymore. So for me, it's useless. Because I'm not gonna be turning a bunch of hoplites into stone, if you know what I mean. I wanna be able to use this on Hydras and Colossi, which I won't be able to do anymore. All because they nerfed it. And from a balancing perspective, it makes sense. And from a tier list and fun perspective, it makes no sense whatsoever. It's too painful to talk about this unit anymore, so let's just move on, okay? Next up, we have the Titan. All Titans feel the same, so I'm just gonna talk about this one, okay? And the Titans in this game feel as powerful as in the original. And when you've built a Wonder, they feel even more powerful, because they gain a huge health and damage boost. These guys feel insane. But that's not the only change they made to Titans. Guess what? They can walk on water now. How amazing is that? I mean, if Jesus can do it, for sure a three-headed monster can do it. These guys are so cool. Pure S tier. And now we move to the Egyptian myth units. Next up, the Minion. These are the units you get from the Ancients' God Power, or that get spawned by the Mummy. It could just be me, but they feel a lot stronger than in the original. Like, I feel they have a lot more health and attack, and the enemy AI loves to target those, so that's definitely a plus. I didn't think I would be putting a unit that has an expiration date anywhere above C tier, but I am. I'm gonna give it a B tier. Next up, Serpents, the ones you get from the Serpent God Power. And these guys suck just as much as they did in the original. D tier. Next up, Anubites. Their jump does area of effect damage now, which is cool, but that's where the coolness stops. I really didn't like those guys in the original, and I really don't like them now either, despite that. However, they did buff them a bit, so I'm gonna give it a C tier instead of a D tier. Next up, the Sphinx, the unit that can turn into a friggin' tornado. Now these guys are quite sturdy, and they're gonna be a really cool tier 2 tank unit. However, I don't really think they're anything special. They do have some redeeming qualities, but all in all, it's a B tier. Next up, Wadjets. I would say the prettiest unit in the game, alongside probably the Phoenix. They are so pretty. They poison units now with their attacks, but that is not why you're gonna be building them. You're gonna be building them to watch how pretty they are. Pretty little serpents. A tier. Next up, Leviathans. Did you know that Leviathans have tiny little T-Rex arms under the water? I did not know that in the original, but here you can clearly see underwater, and it's so cute. My god. They are still troop transports, and they didn't change that much, so I'm gonna give it a B tier. But they are so cute with their little arms. Next up, Petsushos, aka Sunlight Crocodiles. These guys are insane in the original game. Like, you don't have to build any other units, you just build those and you win every time. Here, I think they have been nerfed a little bit. However, they still feel so broken. Like, they still feel so strong and they still feel better than anything this tier of units has to offer. But because they were nerfed, I'm gonna give them an A tier. And alongside the Petsushos, you get the Rock, the flying transport bird that got nerfed into oblivion. Listen to this. Whenever you want to transport units, you have to land the bird first, garrison the units inside, then press the lift off button, and then you can start transporting units. And obviously you have to do the same thing if you want to get the units out of the bird. Logic-wise and lore-wise, this makes so much sense. However, fun-wise, and in this case tier list-wise, it makes none. So I'm gonna give it a C tier. Next up, the anti-building scarab that explodes upon death. Now, its anti-building attack is pretty strong, but its on-death explosion, I think, feels even stronger. It does a lot of damage. However, I don't think this is the strongest unit or anything, but it has its use cases. That's why I'm gonna give it a B tier. Next up, the Scorpion Man. Obviously, its attacks poison, that goes without saying. However, I don't really feel an affinity towards this unit. It costs wood, so you can like spam it and stuff, but I don't really like it, so I'm gonna give it a C tier. Next up, the War Turtle. It can knock boats around, which is pretty cool, but the best thing about it is its health pool, which is insane. When buying a War Turtle, you don't buy damage, you buy a huge piece of meat under armor, and that's what this unit represents. And my god, does it do well. I'm gonna give it an A tier. Next up, the Avenger. It has this pretty ballerina spinning sword attack, which does a lot of damage, but I think its regular attacks feel a bit weaker than the original. You know, it's a cool unit, but I'm gonna give it a B tier. Next up, the Mummy. In the beginning, I thought this was gonna be a D tier for sure, cause it really sucks. However, then I saw the minions it spawns and I changed my mind. The minions are pretty cool, they're pretty strong, and the Mummy is meh, but it has its uses, so I'm gonna give it a C tier. Next up, the Phoenix, aka the Pretty Flame Bird. I love how cool this looks. Really, really, really cool. The Phoenix also sometimes drops an egg when it's killed, and get this, you don't have to pay for a whole nother Phoenix when you click on the egg. In fact, it automatically gives you another Phoenix without having to pay for anything. How cool of an idea is that, original game devs? I wish you could have thought of something like that, and not make me pay 300 gold and freaking 30 favor to get another Phoenix from a Phoenix egg, okay? I'm not triggered, I'm just mad. Thank god the improvements these devs made to the Phoenix are so much better, and it looks so much cooler, so I'm gonna give it an S tier. And we have arrived at the Norse campaign. Next up, the Fimbulwinter Wolf. Those are the wolves that spawn next to enemy town centers when you use the Fimbulwinter god power. And actually a lot of these guys spawn, and they do extra damage to villagers, I believe, which is so great. Unfortunately, I can't give them a higher tier than a C, but I think a C is an okay tier for them. Next up, we have the Gullin Bursty. Now, I'm not sure this guy counts as a myth unit, but it's a freaking mythical boar, okay? It's a myth unit, no matter what the game says. You can actually spawn this guy using the tier 1 Freyr power, and boy is he strong. My god. This guy obliterates everything, especially if you wait for the later ages when he becomes even more powerful. This guy can solo whole armies, that's why they only allow you to use him defensively, but I don't care. This is an S tier through and through. My god, is he powerful. Next up, Odin's Ravens. It's the same story as the Hippocampus. They respawn, they appear at the temple, they have the auto scout button. However, I'm gonna give them the same tier as the Hippocampus. They are strong, but they are only available to Odin. Next up, the Walking Woods from the Walking Woods power. Now, these guys kind of feel a bit weaker than they used to. However, I think, and I'm not sure about this, but I think the power spawns a bit more of them. But more importantly, they can be controlled now. So you can have them as part of your army. In the original, they just walked around aimlessly at the place where you spawned them, and that was it. So, you know, there are a couple of good things about them, there are a couple of bad things about them, so I guess in total it's a B. Next up, the Draugr, a Freyr exclusive unit. These are undead archers that have a special ability where they can attack in a cone. I'm not too impressed with them, mostly because I think there are stronger archers in tier 2 that I'm gonna talk about real soon. I mean, I don't like them too much, but I don't hate them either, so I guess I'm gonna give them a B tier. Next up, Einherji. These guys can buff surrounding units, which makes having one or two of them really powerful. They're not that great by themselves, but having them next to an army is pretty cool, so I'm gonna give them an A tier. And next up, we have my favorite unit in the game. I never thought I'd say this, but it's the Troll. These guys have the ability to occasionally hurl huge boulders at enemies, and boy do those boulders hurt. And they not only deal huge damage, they also knock people away. I cannot overstate how powerful the freaking troll has gotten in the new game. And I love it. I'm here for it. I was a preacher for the troll even in the original when he was meh at best. But I loved having a long-ranged archer unit as the Norse. Like, I love the troll now. This is a pure S tier unit, through and through. Boy, I can't believe I'm saying that. Next up, the Valkyrie. They didn't change her much, or at all, from the original. She can still heal other units, which is great and useful, but honestly, I'm not a huge fan. However, I'm gonna give her a B tier, cause I like being able to heal my units. Next up, the Battle Boar. It can knock people away every once in a while, which is great, and it really excels against buildings, but really cannot do for the life of him anything else. I'm really not a fan of the Boar, mostly because literally all other tier 3 myth units are better than the Boar. And even though it's not the worst tier 3 unit, I'm gonna give it a C. Next up, the Frost Giant. He is so broken in the original game, and he is still broken. However, I do feel it has gotten a bit of a nerf. Yeah, the frost lasts for a long time. Yes, he does a lot of damage, but I do feel like he was better in the original. It's really the same story as with the Petsushos. It's pretty OP, but it has gotten a nerf, so I'm gonna have to give it an A tier. Next up is the Kraken, who has gotten a huge texture overhaul, and I'm here for it. He looks so great. Its abilities though haven't changed. It still insta-kills boats, but I don't care. The Kraken is iconic, probably the most iconic Age of Mythology unit, and for that reason, I'm gonna give it an S tier. Next up, one of my new favorite units in this game, the Mountain Giant. But the Mountain Giant is not the one I want to be talking about. You see, there is a Mountain Giant upgrade that turns him into a Jotun, who gains so much more health and size and height. These guys are bigger than Colossi, man. And you see, the Jotun can flick units away. That's how big it is. That's how small soldiers are. He can just flick them away. Plus, he has a Club Smash ability, which can deal devastating damage to buildings. Like, if you need a tank, building killer, frontline guy in this tier, look no further. It's the Jotun, the one and only, the best tier 3 unit in the Norse campaign. Next up, we have another Freyr exclusive unit, the Rock Giant. And the Rock Giant does basically what you think it does. It does very low damage, has huge health, and it can taunt enemy units to attack him, which is so cool. The unit, however, does lack a bit of excitement, so I really can't give a pile of stone more than a B tier. Next up, we have Fafnir. Yes, I've said it correctly after I've read it in the document. These dragons look so cool. And they spit like fire and acid and are good against buildings and units and stuff like that. And they are considered greedy dragons that love gold, so anyone who slays them is gonna get 300 gold for free. Honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of the unit when I first saw it, but it has grown on me since. It has some cool concepts. They tried something different with it, which has to be rewarded, but I will not be giving Fenrir more than a B tier. Next up, Fenris Wolfbrood. Now, in the original, these guys were insane. When there were a couple of them next to each other, they gained huge stat boosts. Like if there were 5 or 6 next to each other, they would be like freaking racing cars. And they would attack just as quickly as freaking racing cars. However, they were quite squishy and you had to focus one after the other, and that's how you kill them. These guys feel a lot sturdier than the original ones. However, the stat boost they receive is quite negligible, not gonna lie. Like, these guys don't run around like freaking racing cars. They do gain some damage boost and attack boosts, but I still want to see wolves running together as a pack throughout the map. And I don't see that with these Fenris Wolfbroods. So as much as I like the doggo, I'm gonna give it a C tier. Next up, the Fire Giants. These guys are insane in the original. You don't have to build anything but Fire Giants, really, and you can destroy anyone. Here they do feel a bit squishier though, but they still destroy everyone in front of them. They don't have a special ability Magma Ball that runs in one direction, but they throw like 3 or 4 Magma Balls at the target and see what sticks. But other than that, it's basically the same unit. Since they have been nerfed a bit, or at least feel like they have been nerfed a bit, I'm gonna give them an A tier, but they're still a solid unit. Next up, we have Jormund Elver. I didn't have to check what this one's called, I love saying it. And that's the only thing I love about it. It's like good against ships, but same as the Carcinos, it's not really that good against ships. However, I will say that they're pretty good against stuff on land. So if you're battling a base that's located next to a pool of water, I would suggest making a couple of Jormund Elvers, just for the heck of it. Next up, the Nidhogg. Now this was one of the most iconic units in the original. However, they have substantially nerfed it in this one, which I understand because you can recast god powers now and stuff like that, but still. I guess the developers forgot that they've added those spear throwing heroes, which are the direct counter to this guy. Like, if you have a couple of spear throwers next to the Nidhogg is gonna come up short in that battle, for sure. It's not even gonna be a close one, to be honest. However, its only saving grace is that they have given him an ability. And it's a really cool one. It's a Flame Breath Carpet Bomb. Literally that. And it is so cool. And totally makes sense, because it's a dragon. And because of that saving grace, I'm gonna give it a C tier, not a D tier. And now it's time for the Atlantean myth units. First up, we have the Carnivora. There are two types of Carnivoras, one that is placed on water and one that is placed on land. Now, the land one, it's quite easy to kill, because it's on land, and you can surround it with units, and that's the end of the Carnivora's plan. However, on water, it not only has a strong attack, it can also insta-kill ships every once in a while, which is so great. But I don't feel comfortable giving a plant more than a B tier. Sorry, plant. As cool as you are. Next up, we have the Tartarus spawn. If you don't know, you gain that one from the Tartarian Gate God power. Now, these guys were quite strong in the original game, and they infinitely spawn, which was so cool. However, they have been nerfed here a bit, and they are much easier to kill now. That being said, I'm not gonna give it a D tier. And do you know why? Because when they spawn, they make a freaking air flip. This is amazing. My god, this is amazing. I cannot in good consciousness give someone like that a D tier. Sorry, but it's gonna have to be a C. Next up, the Automaton. One of my least favorite units in the game. I just find it so underwhelming. Like, they can repair each other, which is all good and great, and they should be like stronger in a group and stuff like that, but I just do not like automatons. And for that reason, and I don't need any more reasons, for that reason, I'm gonna give them a D tier. Next up, we have Caladria, aka the Flying Healer. And the Flying Healer who has gotten a new ability in this game. It not only heals now, it also slows down enemies. And it autocasts that, so you don't have to worry about any of it. Which is so cool and useful. Now, that was the upside. The only downside this unit has now is that it heals in bursts. It doesn't continually heal anymore. And I like myself a continuous heal, gonna be honest. And that's the only reason why I'm gonna give it an A tier and not an S tier. Next up, we have a Promethean. In the original, this was one of the most underwhelming units I have ever seen. However, and I don't know how, but the developers managed to feel him a lot less underwhelming now. A lot more threatening. I don't know why they couldn't do that with the automatons. Gonna be honest, because it's basically the same thing. It's basically the same unit. This one splits on death in two parts, but they could have done the same stat boosts for the Promethean and the automaton, and I would have been okay with that. This way, the Promethean feels so much better. It's still not gonna be a high tier unit though, don't get me wrong. It's still basically crap, but it's a stronger crap than it used to be, and the textures look a lot more crisp. And for that reason, I'm gonna give it a B tier. Next up, the Satyr, who has gotten a new piercing arrow ability. Now, these guys can be quite strong in huge groups, and they can be quite useful. I'm not even sure what else to say about them. Like, strong in groups, piercing arrow. Good enough for me. A tier. Next up, we have the Servant, probably one of the units you have never ever seen or used. And it's good at one thing and one thing only, healing ships. It can also heal other units, but ships in particular, it's pretty good at. And since it can only do one thing well, it's gonna get to the tier which has units that can only do one thing well. C tier. Next up, the Triceratops, aka the Behemoth. Now, it has a cool new ability where it takes less damage from the front than from the other sides, which is pretty awesome. It's good against buildings, which is also pretty awesome. And this is where the awesomeness stops. It's a mech unit that does a couple of things well, so for that reason, I'm gonna give it a B tier. Next up, the Dryad. Thank God the developers put some thought into how to create this unit, cause it costs 150 wood to make now. It used to cost 150 gold. It makes so much more sense for it to be wood since this is literally a wood person. But this is where the sense stops. It still sucks, maybe even more than it did in the original, gonna be honest. However, because of the price change, I'm gonna give it a C tier. And that's the only reason why, so thank me for it. Next up, we have a unit called Nerade, one that I have basically never built before. But I have tried them out, and it turns out they do quite solid damage. They're like anti-ship units on tier 3, which is not bad, and their ability makes them like smash people with their sharks, so, you know, doesn't get cooler than that. But I do not feel too comfortable with this unit, and since I have never built it, I'm gonna feel the most comfortable giving it a B tier. Next up, the Stymphalian Bird. Yes, I had to read this from a freaking sheet of paper. Because this was impossible to remember. However, the unit itself is pretty cool. It's a flying unit that does a lot of damage and that can even make enemies bleed that it attacks. And I love that. Not much else to say really here. It's a really cool unit, which looks pretty good, and I'm gonna give it an A tier. Next up, the Argus, aka the 200 Eyes guy. Now, this unit looks so freaking cool, man. Especially compared to the original, which was like pretty meh at best. However, the original had one thing going for it that this one certainly does not. The original had an insta-kill attack. And this is where I'm getting triggered again, because they have removed it. And they have given him a freaking toxic puddle. That's what he gets. And that puddle doesn't even do that much damage, so that's something I really hate. Another thing I really hate is that in the original he had tentacles and he used them to slap enemies around. In this game they gave him knives. For whatever reason he has knives now. Or whatever these pointy things on him are. I don't really care what they are. I just want my Argus to come back, man. But he is never coming back, I'm afraid. But because it's a unit that really looks cool and plays cool, I'm gonna give it a C tier and not a D tier like Medusa. Next we have the Lampides. I would say by far the most underwhelming tier 4 unit in the entire game. Like, I have nothing positive to say about her. She can make units hostile for a time, and that's it. That's her ability. Other than that, she has no health, no range, she's incredibly weak, and just an all-around unit that is a bigger liability than anything else. Do yourself a favor and use those resources to buy something else. One of the things you can use resources to buy is the Man of War. Now, its name might not be too recognizable, however, its attack certainly is. It has a chain lightning strike for whatever reason, like the Son of Osiris does. However, this guy can be built multiple times, infinitely times. But you don't need an infinite number of them, you can just have a couple of them and they can literally kill a bunch of enemies for you. Like not even ships, land soldiers. If you can get close to them and to zap them, do it. Because they are not gonna exist much longer. I'm not much of a fan of how the unit looks, but of literally everything else I am a fan of. So this is getting an S tier. I don't care, I love it. And ladies and gentlemen, I have saved the best for last. The Heka Giant, aka the Centimanus as it's called now. Whatever its name is, it doesn't matter. You are going to know it by the name everyone calls it now. The Destroyer of Universes. This guy is so unbalanced, it's not even funny. Now, he has a bunch of health, which is okay, and he has a strong attack, which is also okay, but the thing that's really broken about him is the special attack. It can pound the ground and make a shockwave that destroys everything in its path. And I'm not even joking. I had like an army of Avengers and there were like 2 of these guys, and with 2 ground pounds they destroyed the whole army. They didn't even touch them, they just pounded the ground and it obliterated them. This guy is so imbalanced and so unfair to play against. This is the greatest S tier this game has to offer. Hands down. And I guess that's it. I'm pretty happy with how the list looks. Now, I am gonna make like a couple of more of these lists because they're really fun to make, but after that I'm gonna be returning to my challenge runs. And since you've listened to me for so long, I can openly tell you that I'm going to make a Retold Deathless run, just like I did with the original, because I can see that they've changed enough stuff for it to be a whole different experience. Other than that, I'm gonna thank you for sticking around for this long, and I guess I'll see you in the next tier list or in the next challenge. Peace.